Former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to return to power. Preliminary election results are showing that the right-wing coalition that he leads is poised to win a parliamentary majority. This has raised concern amongst Palestinians of an impending increase in violence and aggression against them.
The prospect of the Netanyahu-led coalition winning the election race has stoked fears of the future among Palestinians. These elections, Israel's fifth in 4 years, come during the deadliest spell of violence between Palestine and Israel in years. The bloc is viewed to be the most right-wing in Israel's history, with the likes of Itamar Ben-Gvir, who in the past has advocated for the expelling of Palestinians, among its leadership. The PLO says their policies eliminate any political potential and will lead to a further escalation of aggression and crimes against Palestinians. Hamas, which has fought multiple wars with Israel over the last decade, says the expected results confirm the increasing presence of an extreme right wing in the Zionist scene and were an indicator that they were confronting an escalation of aggression against Palestinians and their sanctities by any future government. The office of the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, declined to comment as they were awaiting the final results. Negotiations between the Palestinian Authority and Israel have stalled with limited contact between parties as they attempted to calm tensions and coordinate security measures. More than 100 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank this year, while Palestinian-perpetrated street attacks have killed 20 Israelis in Israel or in Israeli settlements.
Well, for an update, we're now joined by Emily Schrader, who's a Jerusalem Post columnist based in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program. Is it still looking like that Benjamin Netanyahu may be back as Prime Minister?
So first of all, thank you so much for having me on tonight. It does look that way. As more and more results have come in, we have seen the Likud party, the party of Netanyahu, actually gain an additional seat. So it does seem that that will be the future prime minister. But, you know, until it's final, we can't really say for sure.
Do we know why he's been able to come back in this way? Because it looked in the last the last elections, that people wanted him gone.
I think that there's a lot of strong opposition to Netanyahu. He's a very polarizing figure within Israeli society. But that being said, there are also a lot of supporters. And I think that there are also a lot of Israelis who are very frustrated with the fact that we have had election after election after election. And there is a sentiment among many people that if Netanyahu is in power, that there will be a more stable government, whether or not they support it. So I do know that there were some voters on the ground who were expressing this type of attitude, also across social media.
I think maybe some people might be surprised that the last administration lasted as long as it did, because it was a grouping of people that just didn't seem to belong together. I suppose this day was always coming.
I'm not sure that it's always coming. I mean, we've seen Israel's governments over time be drastically different. You know, it used to be that the Labor Party was much, much stronger in the Israeli electorate. So it kind of depends on what's going on and what the situation is. It's very likely that in the future it will swing back the other direction towards the left, just as we have seen in Israel's history. In regards to the previous government was a bit of a surprise that it lasted that long, but I actually think that's a testament to the fact that the Israeli society and the Israeli government itself is actually quite resilient. And despite the fact that there are vast differences in ideology, they were able to work together and accomplish quite a bit during that government. The next government will obviously be drastically different, but I'm hopeful that they'll be able to accomplish some good things as well. And again, it remains to be seen what will be on their agenda and who will be in what positions.
All right, we'll talk about Palestine just now, but let's just talk about Israel and Israelis. What issues are on the table for them that they are busy looking to their leadership for and are hoping that this Likud coalition might solve?
Well, I think that when it comes to the most important issues to Israelis, it's been security for a very long time, and it continues to be security, be it Iran or the issue with the Palestinians or other terrorist organizations such as the Iran-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon. So there are very serious threats on Israel's borders. You actually did mention in the opener about the violence. There has been an increase in terrorist attacks against Israeli. In fact, there was one this morning that I personally saw on my way to Jerusalem. I just want to emphasize that the way it was described was street attacks. These are not street attacks. These are actual terrorist attacks. These are people who are actively pursuing people because they are Jewish, not just soldiers. And we've seen that over the past couple of months, a drastic increase with one of the newer terrorist organizations called the Lion's Den in English, who have been very, very aggressive and active in carrying out acts of terrorism against Israelis. Now, why have you seen also Palestinians being killed? Because the IDF is also engaged in protecting its civilians, both Arab and Jewish, by the way. They have an obligation to stop these terrorist attacks. So there has been a crackdown on the counter-terrorist side as well. But it's very important to remember, especially for those outside of Israel, that when Israel's carrying out counter-terrorist operations, they're not targeting civilians. They're targeting specific people. They know who they are and where they are. And they're doing their job in protecting Israeli civilians, regardless of what their religion is. In case your viewers aren't aware, 20% of our population is actually Arab, and they share the same equal rights as every other Jewish citizen.
But Palestinians are getting caught in the crossfire, aren't they?
I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by Palestinians are being caught in the crossfire. Anytime you have conflict, there's a risk on both sides. That being said, it is the IDF's not just, something that they should do. It's their obligation to prevent these terrorist attacks from occurring, to arrest the people who are responsible. And that is what they have been doing. The fact that they operate within civilian areas and that they put their own families sometimes at risk, that's their responsibility. It's not Israel's.
All right, let's talk about what this administration, let's assume Benjamin Netanyahu is elected Prime Minister. What does that mean in terms of, again, trying to get to talks with the Palestinian Authority and trying to find peace between these two groups?
Well, I think the larger issue here is that even within Palestinian society, there's too much infighting for them to be able to come to the negotiating table. Mahmoud Abbas doesn't have a mandate to rule. We're talking about a place the opposite of Israel that hasn't had elections in 14 years, and they're supposed to be having elections. Now, why is that? Because the political party of Mahmoud Abbas, Fatah, is arch rivals of Hamas, who controls the Gaza Strip, the terrorist organization. And as such, Mahmoud Abbas has actively avoided any democratic process in the Palestinian territories for precisely that reason. So even if Mahmoud Abbas and Fatah were prepared to sit down with any Israeli leader from the left or right, Arab or Jewish, the situation is that he cannot implement a peace agreement. Even if they get everything that they want, there is still an issue within Palestinian society of incitement and a rejection of Israel's right to exist. And until that is dealt with, we can't move forward no matter who is in power, because we need to be able to implement the peace deal, even if the deal is made by the leaders. And that situation isn't the reality on the ground right now for Palestinians.
The settlements have been another thorny issue. And I just wonder where Netanyahu is going to go in terms of solving, coming to some kind of resolution about what happens. We saw threats before he came out of power about an expansion, in fact.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk of different settlement expansions for many, many years. But let's also not forget that it was Netanyahu who actually froze any settlement construction for over 2 years as a condition that was set by Mahmoud Abbas to have negotiations. Now, what happened? Mahmoud Abbas waited for the entire 2 years, and then after that said, after the settlement freeze expired legally, he said he wasn't going to come to the negotiating table. So it remains to be seen what will happen with this government. I'm sure that there will be different kinds of negotiations that go into with coalition partners. It's impossible to know at this point what this government is going to do on the issue of settlements one way or the other.
The West Bank has also been another issue. They feel frozen, locked in, and I wonder, again, what is the solution for them?
Well, I mean, I think if you're looking for a solution for the Palestinians, you have to look to the Palestinian leaders. It's not just on the Palestinian leaders, that's true, But at the end of the day, those are their chosen leaders. Those are the society's leaders that they chose. So they are the ones who need to resolve most of their issues. They want to be a state? Great, I'm for it. They can be a state, but they need to take responsibility for that statehood as well. And it seems that a lot of times when we speak about the Palestinian issues and what's going on in the West Bank, they're very quick to blame Israel for things that are actually the Palestinian Authority's legal responsibility. For example, with the coronavirus, the Palestinian Authority made a very big scene in the international media about the fact that Israel was giving them vaccines that were soon to expire. And at first they claimed that Israel wasn't even giving them vaccines, which we know was not true. Now, what's the truth of the matter? According to the Oslo Accords, which are still intact according to the Palestinian Authority and Fatah, the full responsibility for the healthcare system of every Palestinian citizen falls exclusively under the Palestinian Authority. Therefore, Israel had no obligation. Despite that, Israel oversaw the transfer of vaccines to the Palestinians, who ended up rejecting it as sort of an act of a PR stunt. Now, does that mean that Israel is always perfect or that Israel does everything that they should? Of course not. Israel is a country like any other country in the world. But when it comes to feeling stuck in the process or stuck physically, first of all, that's inaccurate, because even when it comes to the security barrier that people love to speak about, this is actually less than 5% of that total, it's not actually a border, but of that total barrier. So most of this, in some places, there isn't a fence at all. In fact, there's one city in northern Israel that's actually half technically Palestine and half technically Israel, and they live together. So there's a misperception in the international community of what's actually happening on the ground. And unfortunately, that is used by some organizations and activists as a propaganda tool. It shouldn't be the case, but it is the case. When it comes to feeling stuck within Palestinian society because of the situation, again, I would turn that back to their leaders. They have a huge problem of leadership both in Gaza and the West Bank. And unfortunately, Israel isn't the person or the body that should be responsible for resolving all of that. At the end of the day, the Palestinians do need to take responsibility for their own situation, elect their own leaders, establish a government that is actually interested in pursuing peace and prosperity, because that is what we want for them in Israel.
A Reuters report is suggesting that Palestinians are fearful that a Netanyahu government, this one, they say, is the most right-wing government in history, and this will mean an escalation in violence. I wonder what your take is on that, and also, do you get a sense that internationally sentiment is starting to become a little bit more sympathetic to the Palestinians, and will that affect the way that Netanyahu leads this time around?
So when it comes to the Palestinians being fearful of an increase in violence, I find that highly ironic, considering that the last month they have been increasing violence against Israeli civilians long before the election. It sounds to me like that is an excuse to whitewash and excuse acts of terrorism committed by various groups, whether from the West Bank or Gaza, and I don't accept that at all in any capacity. There have been left-wing and right-wing governments, and it hasn't mattered in terms of violence against Palestinians. Israel's interest, even diplomatically, it's not in our interest to harm Palestinians. And yet these incidents keep happening because Palestinians are the ones who are being the aggressors against Israel in multiple incidents of terrorism. And as I said at the beginning, Israel has an obligation to protect its citizens, Jewish and Arab. It has an obligation to protect its citizens from instigators and acts of terrorism. So when it comes to the international community, what the international community is saying, or if sentiment is shifting when it comes to the state of Israel, it remains to be seen with this government. Personally, I don't support some of the further right-wing parties in this coalition. But that being said, when we look at the actual election results, the majority of the country, as in 77 as of now, mandates, actually voted center or center-right, not extreme, not actually religious, and not for the Arab parties or the left. That's the majority of the voters. So while people are concerned about the fact that there was an increase in a further right party, at the same time, we have to remember that the majority of the country is actually pretty much in the center, and politically there's been a gridlock due to Netanyahu and the opposition or support of this particular political figure.
Emily Schrader, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very, very much indeed for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, that's Emily Schrader, who's a journalist with the Jerusalem Post based in Tel Aviv. She's a columnist for that publication. And she's saying, look, it looks like Netanyahu is going to probably win another term as Prime Minister, having been frozen out in the last elections. The comeback kid, some people are calling him. Well, we'll just have to wait and see what all of this means, particularly when it comes to the Palestinian question.